Forgive, I didn't realize I didn't do this with you guys in the notes yesterday. Okay, so I'm giving you 2 points. You want to tell me an exponential model that will go through these 2 points. Here is my best advice to you. We are going to start with whichever point has the bigger x value. So they're going to give you 2 points, right? And I'm going to start with whichever point out of those 2 has the bigger x value. So I have 2 points here. I have the point 2, 3, and then I have the point 4, 1/3. Which point would I start with? The 4, 1/3, because, okay, and this will make sense in a second when we start doing this problem. All right, so I'm going to start, here, I'm just going to use my highlighter on this. I'm going to start with this one. All right, now, here's the deal. Each of those points gives you, right, an x-coordinate and a y-coordinate that's on this graph, right? Each one of these x-coordinate, y-coordinate on this graph. What we're going to do is I'm going to use that y equals ab to the x formula. I'm going to start with this point here, and in place of y in this formula, I'm going to put the y-coordinate, and in place of x, I'm going to put the x-coordinate. So when y is 1/3, a and b I don't know, that's actually what we're going to solve for here in a second, but I know when y is 1/3, then x was 4. So I'm literally just setting up a little equation. You're going to repeat that process with the other point. So the other point, when the y-coordinate is 3, I have ab to the x-coordinate, which given to me in that point is 2. All right, now this is going to be different than what you're used to, but this is actually a system of equations. I have 2 equations with 2 different variables. So if I can make 2 equations with those 2 variables, we can solve this system. All right, now this is the part that's a little weird. What you're going to do in this scenario is you're going to divide the top line by the bottom line. Now, like normally when you guys have a system of linear equations, or maybe even like a quadratic and a linear, we might use substitution, elimination, do adding or subtracting. I'm going to do elimination here, and the reason I can do elimination with division, if you want to think back to our last unit, what I do when I divide this in the middle here, a divided by a would become 1. So every time if I set it up that way, if I'm working with an exponential, that'll get rid of the a value. All right, now you guys can grab your calculator, or you could do this by hand, but if I take 1/3 divided by 3, I'm just going to remind you, little keep, change, flip. So if we divide a fraction, it is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So I'm taking 1/3, I'm going to keep that, and I'm going to change that division sign to multiplication. And I know it was not written this way, but if I flip over 3 I could write as 3/1, flip that over, this would be times 1/3. This is going to become 1/9 if I divide that. You can use your calculator if you want to, but if you want to go by hand, 1/3 divided by 3 is going to be 1/9. Anytime you have a fraction, if you just divide it by a plain number, like 1/3 divided by 3 before I wrote all that, these two numbers algebraically get multiplied together is what goes on. So 3 times 3, that's the 9 on the bottom. Okay, now my a's are gone. For the b part, though, I have b to the 4th divided by b squared. So in that situation, that's not just plain numbers, that's variables with exponents. So you're just using exponent properties. So that's where I'd be like, okay, where do we have more b's, the top or the bottom? You'd tell me the top, and I'd say how many more, and you'd tell me 2. So this would become b squared if I divide that. Okay, now literally all you have to do, we're just going to take square root, and for the fraction, both of those are perfect squares. This would be 1/3 is my b value. And I'm just going to make a teeny tiny note over here to the side. Whenever you're working with an exponential, I don't know if you guys remember this from yesterday, if you take like a square root like I did here, or a 4th root, you're supposed to put the plus and minus symbol. If you remember though, by definition, b has to be a positive value if you're working with an exponential. That's part of the rules for an exponential equation. So you're not going to put a plus and minus symbol in front of it. It's just going to be positive 1/3 here. All right, so my goal, I'm going to write y equals ab to the x. So I know b. How could I figure out a? plug it in like a Glade air freshener, right? Okay, now whichever one, now this is me, I don't want to mess around with the fraction, so I'm just going to plug it into the second equation. Okay, I know B now, so I'm just doing like little substitution. So I'm going to write 3 equals A, we still don't know that, but I do know that B is 1/3 now, so this would be 1/3 squared. Okay, now we got 3 equals A. If you square 1/3, you got to square the top, square the bottom. 1 squared is 1 and 3 squared is 9. So I'm kind of reversing what I just did because we're going backwards. Now, what I would do here to get A alone, we're going to divide both sides, or we could divide by 1/9, or I would say let's just multiply by the reciprocal, which would be 9, which would be a little bit faster. This is 27 is my A value. So then my actual answer would be y equals A, which is 27. Our B value was 1/3, and I don't want to multiply those together, right? Because those two separate things. When you have an exponential, we'd have to do 1/3 to the power first, and then multiply it by 27. So that would be our answer. Does anybody have a question? Okay, I want to do one more with you. This has a negative exponent. All right, so you got 2 points, and we're just going to do this y equals AB to the x. And just start, I promise it'll make it easier to work with. Whichever point has the bigger x value, so 2 is bigger than -2, I'm going to start with that one. Okay, now as I do this, I'm just going to use that y equals AB to the x. So I'm going to do 20 equals AB squared. And be real careful. I see a lot of times people will accidentally put the x coordinate where y goes and the y coordinate where x goes. So just make sure you start with the y coordinate. Now, the other point, 5/4 AB to the -2. And again, anytime you're working with an exponential, if you set up a system, you can divide. And the reason we want to divide is because you would always have just a plain A and a plain A. So if I divide the top line by the bottom line, that would just become 1 and eliminate that. All right, now you can do this by hand, or if you want to grab your calculator, do 20 divided by. Now, if you have a scientific, just use the fraction key on the 5/4. If you have a graphing like mine, just put parentheses around the 5/4. You could just do it on the calculator if you want to. It's totally up to you. That's going to end up being 16. You can do it by hand like I did in the last question if you want. Now, if I do b squared divided by b to the -2, what is that going to become? B to the 4th. This would come up to the top, right? And so we'd actually have b squared times b squared, which would end up being b to the 4th. And then this is nice for us because I'm going to take a 4th root to cancel that out real quick. Do you guys remember 4th root of 16? 2. That's my b value. And then it's up to you. You just plug it back in. If it's me, I'm not messing around with the fraction or the negative exponent. So I would put it into that first equation. So I would do 20 equals a times b, which we now know is 2 squared. So this would be 20 equals a. 2 squared is actually just 4. If you divide by 4, your a value is going to be 5. And so then all I have to do to write my model, y equals a, which is 5, times b, which is 2, to the x. Anybody have a question? Okay, now, I know this looks totally different because you have a graph, but we're just going to do this one more at the bottom. All right, so I'm going to ask you to write an exponential model for this graph. So can I write an equation y equals ab to the x for this graph? How would I do that if I have a graph instead of just a couple points? What do you think? Exactly. We're just going to use points from the graph. Okay, now, here is my absolute. If you have a graph, and I'm going to show you why in 2 seconds. If you have a point where x is 0, that you can see that, pick that point. All right, so if I'm on this graph, see how I have the point 0, 3. If you have that point, pick that point. I'm going to show you why in like 2 seconds. Now, you can pick any other point on that graph you want. You only need 2 points to do this, but I would tell you if you see one that has a 0 for an x coordinate, pick that point. Now, any other point you want to pick, I'm just going to pick, let's just do the 112. Whatever point you want to, and I wouldn't tell you that necessarily some are easier than others or anything like that. I'm just going to pick that other point. which is 112. Okay, now here I'm going to start this out real quick. I'm going to set this up just like I did. 12 equals ab to the first. And I used the point I had that had the bigger x value. Now, the other equation, and you do have to write both of these, would be 3 equals ab to the 0. However, anything to the 0 power is what? Is 1. Okay, you remember that? So this is why I want you to pick this point. So if I can see this on the graph, this is really just a times 1. So that second equation we wrote would literally just be a times 1, or just, I have my a value right then and there. Whatever your y-intercept is, which that's what that is there, that's going to be your a value. We talked about that just a tiny bit yesterday. So you still need the other equation because I need somewhere to plug it in to figure out the b value, but I won't have to solve this as a system like the last two. We could just do a little substitution here. So I would do 12 equals, I know a, and then b to the first, so that would literally just be b, divide by 3, and b is 4. So then I'm done, and I just want to write the model with both of those plugged in. So I would write y equals a, which is 3, times 4 to the x. And again, don't multiply those numbers together because you have to do the exponent first. So every time what's going on here is I am multiplying the y